In ancient times, slavery was a pervasive institution across many cultures and societies, including the ancient Near East. The practice of owning slaves was deeply ingrained in the socio-economic structures of these societies. Slavery was often a result of warfare, debt repayment, or economic necessity. Individuals could become slaves through conquest, inheritance, or as a means of survival during times of famine or economic hardship. The Israelites, like their neighboring cultures, practiced slavery. However, the Bible contains regulations and laws aimed at mitigating the harshness of slavery and providing protections for slaves. These laws reflect the socio-economic realities of the time and the ethical principles of justice and compassion inherent in the Hebrew worldview. Before we dive deeper into today's video, I want to take a moment to thank each and every one of you for tuning in. If you're enjoying the content so far and want to see more, please consider giving us a like, sharing with your friends, leaving a comment, and hitting that subscribe button below. Your support means the world to us and helps our community grow. God bless you. Old Testament 1. Regulations on Hebrew slaves. The Old Testament provides regulations regarding the treatment of Hebrew slaves, emphasizing humane treatment. Exodus 21:2 states, "If you buy a Hebrew servant, he is to serve you for 6 years. But in the 7th year, he shall go free, without paying anything." 2. Protection for female slaves. The Bible outlines protections for female slaves, ensuring their rights and dignity. Exodus 21:7 states, "If a man sells his daughter as a servant, she is not to go free as male servants do." 3. Punishment for mistreatment. The Old Testament imposes severe penalties for the mistreatment of slaves. Exodus 21:20-21 states, "Anyone who beats their male or female slave with a rod must be punished if the slave dies as a direct result, but they are not to be punished if the slave recovers after a day or two, since the slave is their property." 4. Release of slaves in the Jubilee year. In the Jubilee year, all Hebrew slaves were to be released, promoting social justice and equality. Leviticus 25:10 states, "Consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you. Each of you is to return to your family property and to your own clan." 5. Prohibition of kidnapping. The Old Testament prohibits the kidnapping of individuals for the purpose of enslavement. Deuteronomy 24:7 states, "If someone is caught kidnapping a fellow Israelite and treating or selling them as a slave, the kidnapper must die. You must purge the evil from among you." 6. Treatment of foreign slaves. While foreign slaves were allowed, they were also afforded certain protections. Leviticus 25:44-46 states, "Your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. From them, you may buy slaves. You may also buy some of the temporary residents living among you and members of their clans born in your country, and they will become your property." 7. Recognition of slavery's hardship. The Old Testament acknowledges the hardship of slavery and encourages empathy towards slaves. Deuteronomy 15:15 states, "Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you. That is why I give you this command today." New Testament 1. Equality in Christ. The New Testament emphasizes spiritual equality regardless of social status. Galatians 3:28 states, "There is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus." 2. Servanthood versus slavery. The concept of servanthood is elevated, contrasting with the harshness of slavery. Ephesians 6:7-8 states, "Serve wholeheartedly, as if you were serving the Lord, not people, because you know that the Lord will reward each one for whatever good they do, whether they are slave or free." 3. Instructions for slave owners. The New Testament provides instructions for Christian slave owners to treat their slaves with dignity and fairness. Ephesians 6:9 states, "And masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Do not threaten them, since you know that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no favoritism with him." 4. Freedom in Christ. The New Testament emphasizes spiritual freedom in Christ, transcending earthly bondage. 1 Corinthians 7:22 states, "For the one who was a slave when called to faith in the Lord is the Lord's freed person. Similarly, the one who was free when called is Christ's slave." 5. Call to justice. The New Testament calls for justice and fairness in all social relationships, including those between slaves and masters. Colossians 4:1 states, "Masters, provide your slaves with what is right and fair, because you know that you also have a master in heaven." 6. Redemption of all. The New Testament teaches the redemption of all believers, irrespective of social status. 1 Timothy 2:6 states, "Who gave himself as a ransom for all people. This has now been witnessed to at the proper time." 7. Treatment of fellow believers. Believers are instructed to treat fellow believers with love and respect, regardless of their status as slave or free. Philemon 1:16 states, "No longer as a slave, but better than a slave, as a dear brother. He is very dear to me, but even dearer to you, both as a fellow man and as a brother in the Lord." These points from both the Old and New Testaments provide a nuanced understanding of the biblical perspective on slavery, emphasizing humane treatment, social justice, and spiritual equality. Interpreting the biblical passages on slavery requires careful consideration of their historical and cultural contexts, as well as their broader theological implications. Understanding the socio-economic realities of ancient Israelite society is essential for interpreting the biblical passages on slavery. Slavery was a common practice in the ancient Near East, and the regulations provided in the Bible aimed to mitigate its harshness rather than endorse it as a moral good. While the Bible contains regulations for the practice of slavery, it also contains ethical principles that challenge and critique the institution of slavery. The teachings of Jesus and the apostles emphasize love, compassion, and justice, which are incompatible with the dehumanization and exploitation inherent in slavery. In contemporary society, where slavery is universally condemned, the biblical principles of justice, compassion, and equality continue to inform our understanding of social justice issues. While the institution of slavery may no longer exist in the same form, the principles underlying the biblical teachings on slavery remain relevant in the fight against modern forms of exploitation and oppression. The issue of slavery in the Bible is complex and multifaceted, reflecting the socio-economic realities of the ancient Near East and the ethical principles of justice and compassion inherent in the Hebrew worldview. While the Bible contains regulations for the practice of slavery, it also contains teachings that challenge and critique the institution of slavery. Interpreting these passages requires careful consideration of their historical and cultural contexts, as well as their broader theological implications. Ultimately, the biblical teachings on slavery remind us of the importance of upholding the dignity and equality of all individuals, regardless of their social status or ethnicity. For joining us on this journey through the timeless tales of the Bible. We hope you found inspiration and wisdom in these stories that have shaped civilizations and touched hearts for centuries. If you enjoyed this video and found value